The Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments. A detailed three-dimensional reconstruction of the wreck reveals engineers worked to keep the lights on even as the vessel sank.
There's one version of Titanic we have never seen until this morning.
That's right. Experts have used special technology to map the entire ship on the ocean floor and create its digital twin.
The Titanic has always been more than a shipwreck.
Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a new look at the legendary Titanic. These fresh images exposing an altered landscape 2.5 miles underwater.
It's a time capsule of mystery, tragedy, and secrets frozen beneath the Atlantic. Recently, a state-of-the-art underwater drone pierced the darkness of a previously restricted section, revealing corners of the ship no one has ever seen. The footage left experts stunned, cabins untouched, personal belongings frozen in time, and hallways that seemed to whisper stories of the past. For the first time, the Titanic's hidden heart is on full display. And today, you're not getting a peek, but clear footage of it, pushing the limits of technology. The dive began long before the drone even touched the Atlantic. Months of planning, simulations, and engineering tweaks had gone into creating a machine capable of surviving what no human could endure. Pressures 1,000 times stronger than anything on the surface, temperatures just above freezing, and total darkness. This was not a simple submarine ride. This was a mission into a ghostly world where even light behaves differently, scattering in the fine silt and suspended particles like tiny sparks in a night sky. The drone itself looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, compact yet powerful, covered in sensors, high-definition cameras, and robotic arms that could manipulate fragile objects with the gentlest touch. Engineers had designed it to move through narrow corridors and unstable sections without disturbing the delicate sediment that had been settling for over a century. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, a ballet of technology and precision. As it descended, the drone's lights cut through the blackness, illuminating the Titanic in ways no human eye had ever seen. Shadows stretched across collapsed decks, twisted metal, and once grand staircases now corroded and encrusted with marine life. The sheer scale of the ship hit immediately. From above, it was a hulking monument of history. Yet up close, every surface was covered in stories, layers of paint peeling, rivets exposed, the subtle shapes of furniture swallowed by decades of rust and ocean pressure. The journey wasn't without its challenges. Currents pushed against the drone like invisible hands, while clouds of disturbed sediment threatened to obscure its cameras. At one point, the drone paused for hours above a collapsed section, holding position with pinpoint accuracy, as if it, too, were absorbing the eerie stillness of the place. Engineers watched anxiously on monitors above, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. But the drone performed flawlessly, a silent explorer in a world that had been cut off from human eyes for more than a century. And then came the first real surprise, the restricted section. For decades, this area had been considered too dangerous to explore. Structural collapses, fragile walls, and the risk of further damage kept divers and robots alike away. But the drone glided into the space effortlessly, its cameras revealing hallways and rooms untouched by modern exploration. Rusty doors still hung on their hinges, scattered belongings hinted at the lives once lived here, and a layer of sediment acted like a time capsule, preserving everything in a ghostly stasis. Even the smallest details seemed to command attention. A cracked porcelain cup resting on a floor tile, a fragment of a ledger, or a bent chair pressed into a corner by time and pressure. Every inch of the drone's journey was a revelation. Engineers and historians, watching the live feed, could hardly believe what they were seeing. Decades of assumption about the ship's interior were being rewritten in real time. It wasn't just technology at work. It was storytelling through movement. Each tilt of the camera, each careful maneuver, unveiled not just a ship, but a world suspended in time. The drone became more than a machine. It was a bridge between past and present, translating whispers of history into vivid, almost tangible images. By the time it surfaced, the team had seen what many thought impossible. They had crossed the threshold into the Titanic's most secret heart, where shadows told stories that had waited a century to be heard. What did it look like? A ship frozen in time. The moment the drone's lights hit the Titanic's surface, it was as if the ocean itself had parted to reveal a secret world. The ship had been lying there for more than a century, yet it looked alive in a way no photograph or sonar map could capture. Rust had sculpted the hull into jagged patterns. Barnacles and coral had claimed their territories, and yet, among all the decay, there was a haunting beauty, a frozen elegance that spoke of the grandeur the ship once held. As the cameras panned across the bow, experts were struck by the sheer scale of the destruction and simultaneously the remarkable preservation. Sections of the deck, once vibrant with polished wood and brass fittings, were still intact, though softened by decades under relentless water pressure. Oddly, the chaos of the wreck felt organized, like nature had chosen to preserve certain stories while slowly erasing others. Inside, the drone revealed a world completely untouched by modern hands. A cabin with a cracked mirror reflected the dim drone light, showing a floor covered in sediment, yet somehow still structured enough to trace the outline of a bed, a chair, and a small writing desk. Personal items were strewn across the floor. Fragments of shoes, a tarnished pocket watch, even a cracked leather suitcase whose contents had long since dissolved into the ocean. Each artifact seemed to whisper a story, inviting the imagination to step in and reconstruct the lives once lived here. The walls bore their own tales, paint layers peeled in a mosaic of muted colors, and engraved initials suggested crew or passenger marks, tiny fingerprints frozen for eternity. In some areas, metal beams, twisted like the remains of a nightmare, collapsed from years of corrosion, yet hinting at the original structure. Experts leaned forward, squinting at the screen as they debated the path of the collapse and the timeline of decay. Every frame from the drone offered new puzzles, but also small, exquisite treasures of history. Perhaps the most striking part was the eerie silence. Unlike in movies, where creaking boards or distant groans dominate, the Titanic's wreck is a quiet world. The only sound came from the drone itself, the subtle hum of motors, and the soft crackle of sonar signals. Watching the live feed, it felt less like observing a shipwreck and more like stepping into a sacred cathedral, the air thick with stillness and reverence. Even the silt in the water seemed to float in slow motion, suspended in a way that made every motion of the drone almost cinematic. Certain rooms revealed unexpected arrangements. A dining room had tables still in place, chairs tipped as if hastily abandoned. A corridor showed a suitcase wedged under a collapsed beam, its contents spilling in a pattern that suggested someone had tried to protect them. It was moments like these that made experts pause not just to document, but to reflect on the human drama frozen in time. Perhaps the most chilling discovery was in the lower deck cabins. The drone's cameras captured the remnants of bunks, personal belongings, and even fragments of handwritten notes preserved in the shadows. The walls bore traces of corrosion that seemed to map the passage of decades, while faint shapes in the sediment suggested objects that had once been carefully arranged. Experts reported feeling an almost visceral reaction. The ship wasn't just a wreck. It was a vessel of memory, a place where the past still lingered with an almost human presence. From above, the drone captured sweeping views of the ship's silhouette against the dark ocean floor. From bow to stern, the Titanic stretched in all its tragic magnificence.
The tragic fate of Titanic has been a global obsession.
Scientists have found wreckage of the SS Titanic,
A monument to human ambition and hubris. But up close, every corner offered secrets, small, intimate details that made history tangible. The The ship was no longer just a story in books or a distant icon in museums. It had become a living, breathing relic, speaking directly through the lens of the drone. Even after hours of footage, the team knew they had only scratched the surface. Every frame raised new questions, hinted at hidden passages, and promised revelations that could rewrite aspects of what was thought to be known about the ship. The Titanic, once silent and untouchable, was now speaking, in shadows, in rust, in tiny artifacts, and the world was finally listening. Secrets of the restricted section. The restricted section of the Titanic was always the stuff of legend among deep-sea explorers. For decades, it had remained off-limits. Narrow corridors, weakened bulkheads, and sections considered too unstable for even the most advanced drones. Nobody knew what exactly lay beyond the no-go zone. Some imagined collapsed crew quarters. Others whispered about hidden cargo or personal belongings abandoned in haste. But when the new drone slipped silently into the forbidden area, it was like unlocking a treasure chest no one had dared to touch. The first thing that struck the team was the eerie intactness of the space. While the outer decks had collapsed in spectacular chaos, this section seemed almost deliberately preserved. Rusted doors still hung on their hinges, though bowed slightly by the relentless pressure of the ocean.
People thought that the ship could not sink. So how did she end up like this on the ocean floor?
Walls bore layers of peeling paint, faintly colored in the soft light of the drone's LEDs, hinting at decor choices from more than a century ago. Even the floors, covered in sediment, retained the faint outlines of furniture placements, suggesting that the last occupants had left abruptly, but left much behind. Corridors stretched in a ghostly maze, narrow and claustrophobic, yet perfectly navigable for the drone. Each turn revealed more fragments of a frozen world. A chair wedged under a collapsed beam, a small cabinet cracked open to reveal objects long forgotten, and a cluster of items that could only have belonged to a passenger or crew member who never left. There were shoes, carefully placed, as if someone had paused mid-step, and a cluster of papers stuck to the floor by time and moisture. It was like stepping into a diary written not in words but in objects. One room, possibly a storage area, contained an array of cargo crates and barrels, surprisingly well preserved despite the ocean's corrosive force. Labels, faded but discernible, hinted at goods meant for the voyage. Canned food, textiles, and even delicate porcelain dishes. What fascinated the team most was how some crates seemed untouched, as though time itself had hesitated before reaching in. The arrangement of items suggested a careful mind at work, one that valued order even in the chaos of sinking. It made the space feel eerily human, reminding everyone that the Titanic was not just a wreck.
The remarkable new images of the Titanic, as you've never seen it before.
The largest underwater scanning project in history.
But a collection of human lives, ambitions, and mistakes frozen underwater. Small personal artifacts peppered the scene, each one telling a story without saying a word. A locket resting on a cracked floor tile, a fragment of a leather-bound notebook, and even the corner of a folded coat, pressed neatly into a space, suggested that someone had paused, intending to return, but never did. The drone's lights flickered across these objects, revealing intricate details: the stitching on a glove, faint engravings on a ring, tiny buttons still attached to fabric stiffened by decades of immersion. Each item added to a growing sense of intimacy, the feeling that the Titanic, even after all these years, still held the memory of its people. What truly stunned the team was a section of the hallway that appeared untouched by collapse. Normally, corridors in wrecked ships are twisted and blocked, yet here, the walls and floor were intact enough to suggest original design patterns. Tiny rivets glinted under the drone's light, and seams between panels were remarkably preserved. It was a level of structural survival that historians and engineers had not expected. The restricted area, considered too dangerous to explore, had become a time capsule, a nearly untouched corner of a ship whose public image is dominated by chaos and tragedy. As the drone ventured deeper, subtle anomalies appeared. Certain beams were oddly bent, almost artistic in their distortion, hinting at stresses from the sinking that had been unevenly distributed. In another corner, a pile of personal effects seemed arranged in a way that suggested someone had tried to protect them, a small human gesture that survived more than 100 years underwater. These tiny clues made the drone's journey feel less like a survey and more like an intimate conversation with history itself. For the experts watching from above, the restricted section was more than a discovery. It was a revelation. Every frame challenged assumptions about the ship's collapse and decay. The carefully preserved objects, the intact hallways, the eerie evidence of human presence. It was as if the Titanic had been keeping secrets specifically for this moment. And now, for the first time, those secrets were coming to light, illuminated by the unblinking eyes of a tiny machine brave enough to venture where humans could not. By the time the drone finally withdrew, the restricted section had already transformed the narrative of Titanic exploration. It wasn't just another wreck site. It was a living archive of the past, a place where history and human experience intertwined in ways that textbooks and documentaries could never capture. The secrets it held were more than artifacts. They were stories, frozen in time, waiting to be retold. And with that, the team realized one truth above all. Even in a century of exploration, the Titanic still had the power to astonish, to shock, and to whisper stories that had never been heard before. The next thing you'll see, artifacts that defy history, unexpected discoveries. The Titanic's restricted section was just the beginning. As the drone ventured further into uncharted corners, it started revealing items that seemed to defy everything historians thought they knew about the ship. At first, the discoveries were small, a tarnished brass knob, a fragment of a porcelain plate, but quickly, it became clear that this wreck was not just preserving history, it was rewriting it. One of the most astonishing finds was a collection of documents tucked into a collapsed bureau. Paper that should have disintegrated decades ago remained legible. The ink faded, but not erased. Maps, lists, and fragments of handwritten notes suggested things that didn't appear in official records. Possible cabin assignments that had been lost, minor cargo that had never been catalogued, and even unusual travel routes that could hint at unrecorded stops or passengers. Every page felt like a secret whisper from the past, a small rebellion against the ocean's erasure. Another unexpected discovery came in the form of jewelry. A delicate gold bracelet, tarnished but intact, lay atop a pile of debris, its intricate engraving hinting at personal stories long forgotten. Nearby, a small ring bore initials that didn't match any known passenger records, raising questions about who had traveled aboard and what secrets they carried. The personal nature of these items made the team pause. For all its fame, the Titanic is often discussed in statistics and names, but these artifacts reminded everyone that real lives, full of hope, fear, and tragedy, had been suspended in time. The drone also uncovered some truly peculiar objects, artifacts that seemed out of place for a ship of its era. A set of tools, possibly used for repair work, had survived in almost pristine condition, arranged neatly as if the worker had just stepped away. A stack of postcards, featuring destinations far from the ship's path, suggested passengers with connections or intentions never recorded in official logs. Even a small music box, caked in silt but recognizable, hinted at moments of joy and normalcy frozen in the Titanic's tragic shadow. Each discovery felt like a portal into lives interrupted, little stories demanding attention. The most striking find, however, was a small trunk in a lower cabin that appeared untouched. Its lock, corroded but intact, resisted the drone's mechanical arm at first, then gave way. Inside, objects were preserved in eerie detail: folded garments, letters, and even a pair of spectacles with one lens cracked. The arrangement suggested someone had paused mid-preparation, intending to return, an intimate glimpse into a frozen instant of human life. The experts watching the feed were silent for a moment, struck by the tangible immediacy of the past. This wasn't a shipwreck as an abstract concept. It was a world where real people had lived, prepared, hoped, and ultimately vanished. Marine life, too, played an unexpected role in these discoveries. Tiny fish had made homes among furniture, and clusters of coral encrusted the edges of porcelain and metal alike. Yet the creatures hadn't fully claimed these artifacts. Instead, the human imprint remained distinct, almost stubbornly present against the ocean's relentless reclamation. The juxtaposition of decay and preservation added to the surreal quality of the footage. Objects decades old, resting as if in a museum display, yet slowly being absorbed back into the natural world. The implications of these discoveries were staggering. Historians realized that many small human-scale stories of the Titanic's passengers and crew might be reconstructed from these artifacts. Stories that had no record beyond these silent witnesses. Every object raised new questions. Who owned it? Why was it there? And what had happened to them in those final hours? Some artifacts even contradicted prior assumptions, hinting at events or possessions that were previously unknown. The Titanic, it seemed, had many more secrets than anyone had imagined. By the time the drone completed its sweep of the lower decks, the team had amassed a catalog of artifacts that could fill a library. Each item was more than a relic. It was a testament to lives interrupted, preserved with an eerie fidelity by the ocean. Scholars would spend years analyzing the findings, trying to connect the dots, but the emotional impact was immediate. These were not just objects. They were voices from the past, speaking across the depths, demanding to be remembered. And so, what was initially assumed to be a mere technical achievement, a drone navigating a wreck, had become something far more profound. The Titanic was no longer just a story of tragedy. It was a living archive, a repository of human experience that defied decay and time. Every artifact, every fragment of life preserved, added nuance and depth to a story we thought we knew, proving that even after more than a century underwater, the ship still had secrets waiting to astonish the world. The artifacts spoke, and the ship answered. Its structure was full of surprises no record had predicted, not even the most known description we've heard and read about the ship. Is it the same Titanic? The deeper the drone explored, the more it became clear that the Titanic wasn't quite the ship historians thought it was. Years of diagrams, sonar scans, and archival plans suggested a straightforward collapse, but up close, the wreck told a far stranger story. Twisted beams, oddly bent bulkheads, and collapsed decks defied conventional expectations, revealing a structural narrative that was both chaotic and strangely elegant. One of the first surprises appeared in the forward decks. Sections thought to have crumpled completely still bore the faint traces of original metalwork. Rivets had popped in unusual patterns, leaving curving folds in the steel that suggested forces acting unevenly across the hull. Some beams had bent almost gracefully, forming arcs reminiscent of architectural flourishes, though born of catastrophic stress. It was as if the Titanic's metal had memory.
There was something about the Titanic. It was so very formal. It was so stiff.
Bending, but not fully breaking, preserving a ghost of its original geometry. The drone's lights revealed more anomalies in the lower decks. Certain corridors and cabins appeared nearly intact, though they should have collapsed entirely under the pressure of decades. Tiny details, the alignment of wall panels, the position of beams, even traces of paint, hinted at a construction robustness previously underestimated. Engineers on the team began sketching diagrams in real time, marveling at how some sections had resisted time and sea while others had crumbled beyond recognition. The wreck was no longer just a victim of history. It was a puzzle, demanding explanations. Even the ceilings told strange stories. In some rooms, overhead panels had warped in ways that preserved the outlines of fixtures and fittings. A collapsed ceiling revealed a precise fold pattern, as if the metal had been sculpted by invisible hands rather than crushed by water pressure. Historians speculated that these patterns could offer new insights into how the ship's sinking actually occurred, perhaps revealing subtle sequences of structural failure that had gone unnoticed in all previous analyses. The hull itself held peculiar secrets. Sections that should have been pitted and corroded were instead covered in smooth layers of marine growth, suggesting a chemical balance that slowed deterioration in unexpected ways. It was a subtle miracle of preservation, allowing the drone to capture details of the hull plating that had never been photographed in such clarity. Rivet lines, once thought impossible to see, were now visible, showing how the Titanic's builders had assembled the ship with a precision that modern eyes could hardly appreciate. Perhaps the strangest observation came from a collapsed stairwell in the third-class quarters. Normally, such areas would be a twisted mess of metal and wood. Yet here the stairwell retained its basic shape. Each step was partially intact, forming a ghostly staircase that led to nowhere. Sediment had settled in layers that preserved the rise of each tread, and faint traces of railing suggested someone, somewhere, might have paused here during the ship's final moments. The drone passed slowly over it, capturing every detail, as if documenting a frozen act of history. Even small anomalies captured attention. A door twisted inward in a way that seemed physically improbable. A beam ran diagonally across a cabin, not crushed but bent like a ribbon. And in one corridor, a ceiling hatch hung in place, swinging slightly in the gentle current, a haunting reminder that the Titanic still moved, in its own imperceptible way. These oddities challenged assumptions, hinting that what experts had considered a straightforward story of collapse might actually be a far more complex choreography of metal, water, and time. By the time the drone completed its sweep of these structurally curious areas, the team realized they had more than visual data. They had clues, patterns, and hints that could rewrite the technical understanding of the Titanic's sinking. The ship was no longer simply a tragic monument. It was a lesson in resilience, a living demonstration of how materials, design, and the forces of nature interact in ways both predictable and mysterious. The Titanic, it seemed, had one more secret. It wasn't just a wreck. It was a living archive of engineering and accident, waiting for technology like this drone to read it properly. Every twisted beam, every bent plate, every odd fold in steel was a line in a story written by pressure, water, and time. A story the world was only beginning to understand. And beyond the artifacts and bent beams, the Titanic's corridors awaited, silent, shadowed, and eerily alive. The ghostly hallways. As the drone slipped into the labyrinthine corridors of the Titanic, the wreck transformed into something almost cinematic. Narrow hallways stretched into darkness, lined with warped doors and rusted panels, their edges softened by decades underwater. The drone's lights pierced the gloom like spotlights on a stage, illuminating each room in slow, deliberate sweeps. Sediment drifted in the current, suspended like fog, giving the ship an ethereal, almost dreamlike quality. The first corridor the drone explored was in the first-class section, and it immediately revealed contrasts between grandeur and decay. Ornate paneling, once polished and gleaming, was now dulled by corrosion, but still carried the faint traces of artistry. A carpet, long gone except in fragments, had left an outline of its original pattern in the sediment. Shadows from the drone's movements danced across the walls, creating fleeting illusions of movement, as if passengers from a century ago had returned to walk these halls. In other areas, the hallways were narrower, almost claustrophobic, and the drone had to navigate with extreme precision. The sonar sensors beeped softly as it avoided obstacles, sliding past fallen beams and collapsed ceilings. Here, every object felt like it had a story. A single shoe wedged under a beam, a suitcase pressed against the wall, a fragment of a chair caught mid-collapse. Each item, frozen in place, added depth to the haunting atmosphere, reminding observers that human presence had once filled these halls with life and noise. One of the most cinematic moments came in a lower deck corridor. The drone's light revealed a small cluster of artifacts, arranged almost as if someone had paused mid-action. A pair of gloves lay on the floor, near a tipped-over stool and a scattered stack of papers. Tiny fish swirled in the gentle current, adding movement to the otherwise frozen scene. The combination of light, shadow, and suspended debris created a surreal tableau. The corridor seemed alive, though it had been silent for more than a century. Even structural anomalies contributed to the cinematic effect. In some sections, walls bowed slightly, and ceilings sagged in gentle arcs, producing a warped perspective that made the drone footage look like a scene from a science fiction film. Beams and panels, twisted by pressure, reflected light in unexpected ways, giving the hallways depth and texture beyond what any museum exhibit could replicate. The entire environment felt like a set designed for storytelling. Yet everything was completely real, untouched by human interpretation until now. The drone's journey also captured the contrast between light and shadow in a way that emphasized the Titanic's eerie beauty. Bright patches of sediment shimmered under the LEDs, while corners remained cloaked in near-total darkness. It was in these shadows that the imagination ran wild. The mind automatically filled in the spaces with the echoes of footsteps, whispered conversations, and the faint hum of a ship that once carried thousands of lives. The footage wasn't just observation, it was immersion, a chance to walk silently through history without disturbing it. Even mundane elements became fascinating in the drone's cinematic lens. Hinges, screws, and small fixtures, all corroded but intact, formed intricate patterns under the lights. Water droplets, clinging to the drone's lenses, created ghostly reflections. Sediment swirled like clouds in slow motion, and occasional shafts of natural light, penetrating from gaps above, added fleeting brilliance. Every frame captured a balance of chaos and order, decay and preservation, a visual story of a ship suspended in time. By the time the drone completed its sweep, the ghostly hallways had transformed the Titanic from a distant relic into a tangible, almost living environment. Observers felt not just awe, but intimacy, a connection to the lives and spaces frozen in the wreck. The corridors were no longer just metal and wood. They were vessels of memory, echoing the human presence that had once walked their lengths. And for the first time, the world could see them not as collapsed debris, but as cinematic corridors of history, whispering stories across the deep. Watch out for future uploads in this channel. Don't miss out, so click that subscribe button now.